I don't even remember anymore, man. Okay, I don't know. We've had a couple of them like that. Well, good evening. Glad to have you with us this evening on our Bible study. We're looking at the character study of Joseph. We're in part 5. We've at least got 2 more parts after tonight. Tonight we're going to take a look at Pharaoh's dreams and the interpretation of the dreams and how that role in those dreams and how the rise of Joseph out of prison. So, Eileen, good to see you. Glad the Haynes joined us. And like I always say, if you're online, if this is your first time, welcome. We hope that you'll take a moment to maybe get involved and engaged through using your messenger. I'm watching them, and usually I'm pretty good about catching them. If I'm not, somebody will let me know, and then we'll respond to them. So if you want to involve and get engaged, I'll stop and we'll take a look at them. We're going to go through it tonight. We're going to kind of do a quick little catch-up because we want to keep that continuity of it. And then we'll jump into the Pharaoh's dreams. But first, let's go ahead and have a word of prayer. Our most blessed and loving Father, we're very humbled as we begin this evening of study, and we hope that we would always focus ourselves upon your desired meaning of the scripture that we study. We hope that we would always be humble in our understanding of the messages and be able to change and shape our lives into the Spirit of Christ. We thank you for each person who's taken the time to be with us, and we hope that those who weren't able to be here physically with us, that you would help bless them and restore them to us once again. And we ask this in Christ's name, amen. Okay, so we've got this young man, Joseph, at 17. He's kind of a coddled young man, spoiled, as his brothers would say, a lot of animosity, dysfunctional family. Finally, the brothers are fed up. They throw him into a well. Instead of killing him, they work a deal. They sell him. He ends up in Egypt. In Egypt, then we see where he ends up being sold as a slave, hired into Potiphar's house. Things look like, okay, gone from the pit to now serving as in the master's house of Potiphar. Looks like everything's going great. You know, everything's fine. And then all of a sudden, his wife makes false accusations and angers Potiphar, so then he's thrown into prison. Now, this prison is a unique prison. It's a prison that is where Pharaoh would keep people close to him that he wanted to check, and, you know, that he didn't want to throw, you know, they might have been dignitaries or family or people that he wanted to hold and contain close by and then render a judgment. It wasn't some of the nasty prisons that they had around Egypt, but it was also Potiphar was probably the man in charge. So he puts him into prison. The captain of the guard operating the prison turns the prison over to Joseph. Joseph rises again. Everything he does, 2 common things we see. In Potiphar's house, he was very blessed. God was with him, and that their master always see what a good job they're doing and that their God is blessing them, and they recognize that. This happens with the jailer that sees this young Joseph, and so he turns the prison over to him, basically operations, and all the prisoners are in his care. 2 very unique ones come along. We have a cupbearer and a baker from the Pharaoh's household officials, and so they're cast into prison. They've done something to upset the Pharaoh, and then Joseph notices they have a dream. Both of them have dreams. One of them has a dream about the vines and him, you know, squeezing these grapes into the cup and handing it to Pharaoh. The other one has a basket with bread on his head, and these ravens are trying to pick at it. And Joseph, again, gives credit to God and says, I can give you this understanding. The first one was favorable. Pharaoh's going to restore you back as a cupbearer into the service of the Pharaoh's house. And so then we see when the baker decides, hey, that was a good interpretation, he tells his dream, and that's not so good. In 3 days, he's going to lift your head. And it happens precisely the way that Joseph had said. Now, the one thing he asked of the cupbearer, he said, only remember me when it's well with you. Please do me the kindness to mention me to Pharaoh. You know, there's a really interesting lesson, I think, about this. A lot of times when people are helped by others, they're forgotten. we forget about those who have helped us along the way. We see that, kind of figuratively, people become too big, they move on beyond their family, they become rich and famous, and they forget about all the people who have helped them. And then the other way around, you'll always hear sometimes they'll go, well, I never forgot where I came from. And I know one actor that this is proven. You may not like him, George Clooney. George Clooney was sleeping on these guys' couches. There were 5 of these friends. He would stay in their garage. He slept on their couch. He was, mooching off of them. And to this day, they get together every year. And one of them was talking about that he called them, and they got a nickname for themselves. He said, call the guys together, come over. They all come over to the house, and they get in there. He had a bag sitting in front of each one of them. And he said, open it up. And he opened it up, and it was $1 million cash for each one of his friends. And they looked at him, and they went, what are you doing? He goes, you know how many couches I slept on? How many times I ate out of your refrigerator? Look what you've done for me. Now it's my turn. And on top of that, don't worry about the taxes. I've already paid the taxes. This is tax clear. And one of them said, no, I don't need the money. You can have it back. And George Clooney looked at all the other ones. He goes, you hear that? He doesn't want the money, so nobody's going to get the money. And so he goes, okay, I'll take the money. And he gave it to charity or something. But see, now that's somebody who didn't forget where he came from. And all Joseph asked for was to just make his situation known. He's not asking to tell the Pharaoh, you got to set him free, but just tell him, I'm down here, I'm a Hebrew who was wronged and imprisoned wrong, and I just want to go home. And so he's back, and for 2 years we see, he forgets him. And not just a week or two, but for 2 full years, we see that he forgets about him. Now, how discouraging that is for somebody that if you're serving God. And now this goes both ways, because I know sometimes I've been the one on the receiving end, and I have forgot to bless the person that has helped me. And I'm not saying you should ever do something kind or Christian-like in order to get a reward or get a pat on the back. But I think we need to understand that, there's times where people have helped us, and we need to never forget them, and that they're always there. But so after 2 whole years, now that's a long time to be down in a dungeon prison. What would you be thinking? He's getting close to the age of 30. So he's been there in prison since, basically he's been a slave in Egypt since age 17. So now he's 28, and this guy forgets about him, and then he turns 30 before this all happened. 13 years. You've just been, how long could your faith endure that? Now again, remember, there's nothing that ever says God revealed anything to him. Anything. I mean, he's not going to church. They don't have a release program. They don't have churches. So how does he even practice his faith? And yet this young man seems to maintain this great faith in God without being able to go and offer sacrifices and things like this towards his God the way that the Hebrew customs would be. And today it's sad because we have a place we could come to. We could come and worship, and people don't even have a faith that can last. Kind of judges us harsh, doesn't it? People endure. You can't get in a much worse life condition than what Joseph has been experiencing. And every time he's been blessed, he's been kicked down. Blessed, kicked down. But it says God is still favoring him, and God is still with him. So after 2 years, we see then finally Pharaoh has these dreams. So for a moment, I want us to remember God has a plan, and it's a big one. And it's from the beginning of creation. God laid down a plan. And that was the ultimate redemption for man even before the world was created, right? And then when Eve sinned and man sinned, then he made a promise to Eve that through her descendants, he would bring forth a seed line. And then we see, nearly 1,600 years go by before then we see Abraham come along, and he establishes a very specific covenant. In that covenant, he tells Abraham, your people will what? They'll get a land promise, a blessing. They're going to get the descendant, the king promise. It's kind of there. And all nations will be blessed through them. And then he gives them this little bit of historical perspective. He says, but your people are going to go into a foreign land for 400 years. Do you think Joseph ever sat there and went, oh, this is the key, man. I know I'm a key player in this big plan. I'm over here in Egypt. This is a foreign land. I'm putting this together. I get it. God's put me here, and so I'm going to be over here to fulfill what he told our father Abraham. And that means, I guess, this is the start of that 400-year period that Abraham was told about. No, I don't think he didn't see. I don't believe he saw all that. He was probably taught it, but to sit there and then say, I'm in Egypt, and I'm going to end up bringing all my family over here, and all these descendants are going to be here for 400 years. No, he saw himself thrown into a pit, sold as a slave, off in a foreign land, all by himself, and his family's forgotten about him. And nobody's come to try to find him. So nobody's coming to Egypt. Nobody's coming to a foreign land. So there's no reason at all for him to see this magnificent big picture of what God is doing. And why wait 2 years? I mean, okay, we get it. He forgot you. But why did poor Joseph have to wait another 2 years before then Pharaoh had the dream? Where do you think the dream came from? Came from God. Well, couldn't God done this a little bit sooner? If I was Joseph and I got out and I said, man, wait a minute. What's up? I mean, come on, you left me down here another 2 years? And that's what I mean. We have to really kind of think about how do we see his faith is by the way he's endured and continually gives God the glory for what's happened, what he's able to do. And I believe that if he's saying, he's already done this with the cupbearers, remember, and the baker, he said, I'm not doing this, it's God. So I think that if he can recognize that God has given him the ability to interpret dreams, that Joseph is faithful enough to look around and see how no matter what situations he's in, God is blessing him. God is blessing him. But there's got to be that one moment in another 2 years going, okay, I know you're there, Father. I know you're taking care of me, but wow, do we really have to keep going like this? So he has this dream. Let's take a look at the dream, starting in verse 2 and 3. Pharaoh has a dream, and behold, there came up out of the Nile 7 cows, attractive and plump, and they were fed in the reed grass. And behold, 7 other cows, ugly, thin, came up out of the Nile after them, and stood by the other cows on the bank of the Nile. And the ugly, thin cows ate up the 7 attractive, plump cows. And Pharaoh awoke, and he fell asleep, and he dreamed a second time. And behold, 7 ears of grain, plump and good, were growing on one stalk. And behold, after them sprouted 7 ears, thin and blighted by the east wind. And the thin ears swallowed up the 7 plump, full ears. And Pharaoh awoke, and behold, it was a dream. In this alone, you see, it's like, this is so vivid that he has to wake up and then go, okay, this, you ever had those dreams? I've had a few where, when I woke up, then all of a sudden I realized, oh, okay, I had to check myself to make sure. This is how real this was to him and his visual ability and senses during this dream of standing by the Nile. Now, the Nile is symbolic for life. Everything about Egypt's existence was about the Nile. It wasn't like today, if a country hits a famine or has a drought, they can rely on resources being shipped across the Atlantic Ocean or the Pacific Ocean or caravanned in on trains and stuff, flown in and take care of you. No. When a nation's resources collapsed, it was usually agricultural or something internally, and it was devastating. Not like today. A nation can help another nation anywhere in the world. But that Nile was about life, and it was worshipped. He's standing there looking at the very thing that is the cornerstone of Egypt's existence. And what does he see? Cows. Now, it could have been any animal. It could have got the same kind of message. Except the cow is sacred as well. It's also something that was revered as sacred. So he sees 7 very beautiful, healthy cows, and then all of a sudden, there's 7 ugly, gaunt-looking cows, and the ugly ones eat up the good ones. That had to be kind of startling. And then so it wakes him. Then he has a second one, and the other one is around food, meat and food. Has to do with life of his nation that he's responsible for. So in the morning, it says, starting in verse 8, so in the morning his spirit was troubled, and he sent and he called for all the magicians of Egypt and all of its wise men. Pharaoh told him his dreams, but there was no one who could interpret them to Pharaoh. Now this is kind of the opposite of Nebuchadnezzar. Remember, he had a dream, and he wouldn't tell them what the dream was. He said, no, you tell me. That's smart. If you're wise and you're somebody who you say you have this spiritual ability, and I had this dream, I want you to tell me what it was. Because I could tell you something and you're just going to make up an answer. I thought that was brilliant with Nebuchadnezzar when he did that. And then nobody could answer him. So I compare it to this one. And when you look at people in power, especially the Pharaoh, and he could throw you in, he could have your head beheaded, you could be executed, your life was dependent upon him. He didn't have to worry about some judicial prudence. And you bring forward all of these magicians and wise men, and he tells them the dream. I am stunned that they didn't make something up. I really am. He doesn't know what it means. So we can make something up. Well, if you think about it, almost nothing they ever prophesied came to pass. So that was something very common with them, right? So there's a part where if he's called you on the carpet, you'd come up with something. They don't even respond. It's like they don't have anything. And I think that's purposeful too, because what is the focus going to be? The focus is going to be that only God can answer these dreams. And that's going to be a message for Pharaoh, that this is something only God, and there's only one source that's on the earth that's going to help get that answer to him, and it has to come. So he's called every resource that he can to determine it. And and that's what I mean. You have a very rich you have a really spiritually rich dream. You have the Nile. They could have made something up about the Nile, right? Isis, she's going to, you have cows. That's something very spiritual as well. So there was a lot of material that they could have worked with to have manufactured something. But I think their silence is on purpose. That God is trying to make sure that they don't answer. They cannot answer. Oh, and guess what? Verse 9. Then the cupbearer said to the Pharaoh, oh, I remember my offenses today. Isn't that convenient? How many days have you been enjoying living in the Pharaoh's house again, and you never could figure out that there's this poor Hebrew boy that took care of you, was kind to you, interpreted the dream for you, and you just forgot about him. So I think that's kind of interesting how now it's convenient. And he says, oh, I remember my offenses today. What he means is I forgot, that was an offense that I forgot to tell you. When the Pharaoh was angry, and then he just retells the story here. He just says when the Pharaoh, it's almost like third person because the Pharaoh's right there. I thought that was kind of funny. It's like, oh, yeah, that you're talking about me, right? But he's saying it kind of third person, like, when the Pharaoh, oh, by the way, you, was angry with the servants and put me in, and the chief baker in custody in the house of the captain of the guard. That's Potiphar's house, captain of the guard. So we dreamed on the same night, he and I, each having a dream of its own interpretation. A young Hebrew was there with us, a servant, the captain of the guard. See, again, really linking, a servant of, not another prisoner. Notice that? It's very interesting. You see that position that Joseph has achieved, but yet in a way, he is imprisoned. He's got free roam, but Potiphar can't afford to just let him go free. He's a slave. So he just can't say, oh, well, go set up residency on downtown somewhere. No, he's got to keep, he can't bring him back in the house because Mrs. Potiphar, she's going to lose her mind. She's upset. So you could say he's free, but he's not. And here, this is where, when he says that, a servant of the captain of the guard. When we told him, he interpreted our dreams to us, giving an interpretation, each one according to his dream. And as he interpreted to us, so it came about. I was restored to my office, and the baker was hanged. And so, and that's something Pharaoh could go, yeah, I remember that. That's been 2 years. I remember when I threw both you guys into prison. And you're saying there's a servant, that, like I said, there's somebody working in the jail that was able to interpret the dreams, and it came out exactly. So that is the source. That's why I believe that the magicians, and nobody could answer that source, because God is directing this to bring Joseph before Pharaoh. Then Pharaoh sent and he called Joseph, and they quickly brought him out of the pit. And when he shaved himself and changed his clothes, he came in before Pharaoh. Now, when it says bring him out of the pit, that's kind of a subterranean jail. To us, it sounds like the pit he was tossed in, but it's not. His brothers tossed him in a pit and pulled him out and sold him. And then now it's interesting because the usage of the language is kind of a play on it. He's bringing him out of the pit again, but it's really the way the design of this jail where Potiphar was living his residence and where it's connected to the house of the Pharaoh. It was just a subterranean. It's easier to build a jail underground and then have to worry about them digging out the walls. They're down. But I love the way it's saying, kind of bringing him up out of that pit. Now, another thing here, we mentioned this about trying to date which Pharaoh, the dynasty, was ruling at the time that Joseph was there. And again, just kind of without backing up too much, there was around the 10th dynasty where there was a division in Egypt. The southern or lower Egypt, basically, they had a mass migration of people coming in from Canaan. And they had lived in Goshen, the lower delta, and they grew and grew and grew and grew and grew, and finally to the point where they overthrew the Pharaoh and started ruling the lower part of Egypt. And that's called the lower kingdom. But there was a Pharaoh in the upper portion. He maintained all the Egyptian cultures, worshiped the Egyptian gods, but the one in the south, where this would be where Joseph is at, they did not. They had different gods. Their gods were more from the Canaanite region, and the Egyptian pharaohs still maintained the Egyptian gods they worship. And so these are some of the signs, because one of the customs we know, the Egyptians were very clean, and they did not believe in hair, facial hair or body hair. So what do you see here? They bring him out, and what did they do with him? They shaved him. And so scholars have said that alone says this is not one of the Asiatic pharaohs from the south, because they didn't care. They had facial hair. So that places it around the 12th dynasty. So now we can really kind of get an idea. We did some other things backdating, but this is a very powerful statement, I think, to show that this is a pure Egyptian time when Egypt was reunited under one singular pharaoh. Just a little thing. It's not that important, but it's just kind of neat to know that archaeologically wise, you can start to look and see these things come together. Some will disagree. Some say that it is, but I think there's strong evidence, and we've already presented it. So he cleans him up. He brings him before Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, I've had a dream, and there is no one who can interpret it. I have heard it said that you said that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it. So Pharaoh calls him and says, and now the other thing is quickly brought him out. They didn't delay. It's funny how long he stayed down there, and then all of a sudden now it's like, get him out, get him up, get him up. You know, it's kind of like if somebody called and said, the president wants you, you're going to go. You're going to get there. You're going to get there. You know, so you get him there, and once they've cleaned him up, then you bring him in. And Pharaoh, I've had this dream, and you apparently have that ability. Now, I love Joseph's response. It's not I. It's not me. But God will give Pharaoh a favorable answer. Now, you got to understand, he does not know. Pharaoh does not worship or respect, per se, this God of the Hebrews. And that's another thing was the Canaanite pharaohs were sheep herders. And you'll notice that later on we see where the Pharaoh, by the time when Moses comes, or when Joseph settles his family, there's a conflict we're going to see. I'll bring it up right now. And again, when Joseph brings his family, well, they're shepherds. And he tells the Pharaoh, yeah, we got a problem here because they're shepherds. Now that also points to the fact that this is an Egyptian Pharaoh, not an Asiatic, what they call Pharaoh. So he's telling him, it's not me, it's Yahweh. And then he's going to identify, well, it's not any of my gods, the Egyptian gods. And he's not afraid to say that. That's something about, this is not the 17-year-old kid that showed up as a slave. This is the 30-year-old young man now. You notice the age 30 is very important in the culture, especially with the Hebrews. You notice during Jesus' time, you couldn't teach, become a rabbi until you were 30. And so that's why Jesus didn't start his ministry until he was 30. Then he could be respected and accepted. And I thought it was kind of interesting that this is 30. So, and all that he's gone through, I think he calmed down quite a bit. There's a lot of emotions, that immaturity that we saw, the way he responded to his brothers, that I think by now is gone. But he's got some courage to stand before Pharaoh. Now, another thing, 13 years, he is becoming Egyptian. He can speak Egyptian. He's dressing like an Egyptian. He understood the culture of the Egyptians. And more, he's kind of separating away those Hebrew cultural values that he had when he was 17 and raised. So he knows how to stand before a Pharaoh, in other words, because he's had to show respect to other officials. But it's God. Now, when he says there, God's going to give you a favorable answer, he's not saying that it's going to be a good outcome. He's just saying it's going to be favorable. It's going to be an accurate. When God gives you this answer, it is true. Because it's not favorable, right? I mean, we know because it's going to say you're fixing to have a tremendous famine. You're going to have all this going on. So it's not. Matter of fact, some of the busts of the Pharaoh, if you look at them, you'll see them sometime. A lot of the pharaohs have a smile. The pharaohs that ruled during this period, they don't. It's very telling. Archaeologists have said it's just kind of interesting that the two pharaohs that served during the time of Joseph's life, they weren't necessarily all that happy because they went through a lot between this. Because there's more that's going to happen. We're going to talk about next week than just gathering up resources. There's a radical economic shift in land and power that Joseph is going to be instrumental in changing the fabric of the government of Pharaoh that people miss sometimes. It's amazing. And so it was a trying time. So he said, points to God. He's always done that. He's never been afraid to do that. And so then Joseph said to the Pharaoh, the dreams of the pharaohs are one. God has revealed to Pharaoh what he's about to do. So, they're the same dream. There's not two separate individuals. This has a completely different meaning. This has a complete... He said, no, they're one. But they're giving a different aspect, different vision on the same interpretation. And so he is also telling him, God's showing you a little favor. He's going to tell you. God didn't have to do that. How many times has God done that? Remember, I said this a while ago. God is working the long game. Joseph is a part of this little bitty part of the entire plan that God is working. This is just the beginning of that 400 years that Abraham was told about nearly 150 years earlier. And now, Joseph isn't putting all this together. And so God is bringing this out. 2 years. We don't know why he left him 2 years and they forgot about him. But all of this, again, is flowing exactly the way God wants. And he wants Pharaoh to know. Why? Because he wants Joseph. He's empowering and blessing Joseph. And the way he's doing this is by elevating him through, showing him the credibility of his character. We forget about that sometimes. Sometimes we think, well, he's just kind of like the operator. Hello, what do you want? And you're just passing a message. But what does it do? It's the very same thing the way the Holy Spirit was operating in the first century. The apostles would speak a message. We know that it came by the Holy Spirit. But then they would confirm it by either speaking in tongues, healing, or something like that. And that gave credibility to that person. And so you would listen to them. And that's what's happening here is he is pointing to God. God is now going to point to him. So all that he's gone through, Joseph now is starting to see the fruition of all that suffering and time that he's been put down. So God is going to reveal this to you, what's going to happen. Nations go through famines. Nations go through earthquakes. It's not new. So this is a special message. He said, there will come 7 years of great plenty throughout the land of Egypt, but after them there will arise 7 years of famine, and all the plenty will be forgotten in the land of Egypt. The famine will consume the land. It's long enough, in other words, to where people are going to forget about how well we used to have it. What that's like is like the Great Depression in America. We've lived long enough. There's been enough generations that have passed. Gary, you had parents, but you didn't, you see. I had grandparents that lived through it. There's very few that have lived through that remember how terrible it was to live during the time of the Depression. So that's kind of what he's saying is that, this is going to be long enough of a famine where the people are going to lose hope. They're going to look at it and go, it's never going to get better like it used to be. That's rough because you're the boss, you're the leader of this nation, and you can't keep giving them promises and say, oh, remember back when we had it? Yeah, and when's that coming back, man? I don't remember that. So that's kind of what he's saying, this kind of overall societal influence of what this devastating famine is going to have upon them. And it's just going to consume all of it. And the doubling of Pharaoh's dream means that the thing is fixed by God and God will shortly bring it about. It's coming quick. Remember, God's working a long game. Right at this moment, it's getting short. It's coming up. But God's going to give enough time to be able to carry out a plan in order to help protect the people. But ultimately, God needs to get Joseph's family out of Canaan and bring them in to the foreign land, because that's what he told Abraham he was going to do 150 years earlier. But also, if they stay out there, they'll die. So in a twofold way, he's fulfilling a promise, he's elevating Joseph, and God indirectly is going to be getting the glory, because the Pharaoh's going to sit and go, wow, your God's real. Your God is real, because he's going to see the blessing. There are a lot of cool things. I mean, diverting a river. He builds a lake. There's some amazing things that he does that archaeologically we have found associated with the time of him and the way he did some things and had him. He's going to be really the assistant Pharaoh, like the vice president. And nobody can tell him to do anything except Pharaoh himself here. So all of this is working towards the long game. And so the double, remember I told you, 2 dreams Joseph had. 2 dreams, you notice, that come from in the prison. The cupbearer, the baker. Pharaoh, 2 dreams. In the Mosaic law, it was required, in order to confirm something as true, you had to have what? 2 witnesses to be legitimate. Now, this is just an extra. I'm not going to charge you for this one. But the Emperor Trajan, when the Christians were rising up, and it was around 100 AD, Ptolemy Jr. was one of the proconsuls in Judea, in the region. And these Christians were becoming kind of a concern, because now they saw him as just a group of the Jews. But Ptolemy Jr. was like, what are we doing with these guys? And so he wrote a letter to the emperor and said, I don't know what to do with these guys, because they're great citizens, but they're weird. They don't have a place in which they necessarily worship, but they're not hiding about it. And so Trajan wrote him back and he said, look, don't go look for them. Don't go out and hunt them down. If you run across one, bring them before you, but have 2 witnesses. I just thought that was cool. I mean, even here's Trajan, a Roman emperor, saying, you got to have 2. Okay, I'm not charging you for that little bit. I just thought that was kind of cool, because that's exactly what we see. He's saying, why is it double dreams? Because God's saying that's how true it is. And so Pharaoh said, you're going to jump down, because he basically gives him some more advice. Joseph said to him, what you need to do is you need to pick somebody. Let me jump down. I didn't want to put all the verses because it's so many verses. But in 33, he says, now therefore let Pharaoh select a discerning and wise man, and this is Joseph speaking, and set him over the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh proceed to appoint an overseer of the land and take 1/5 of the produce of the land of Egypt during the 7 plentiful years. And then let them gather all the food of these good years that are coming, store it up under the authority of the Pharaoh for food in the cities, and let them keep it. That food shall be reserved for the land against the 7 years of famine that are to occur in the land of Egypt, so that the land may not perish throughout the famine. This guy's been working where? In a jail. Did he go to the University of Egypt? Did he get a degree? I mean, he's a Hebrew. They look down on people who are shepherds and stuff. They did not look kindly to Hebrews. They were not smart people in the Egyptians' eyes. This is a powerful nation at this time. And this kid comes out of the pit of a prison and is able to reveal this level of a wisdom that the Pharaoh sees it. It's like, wow. That alone is another message. It's very similar to a fisherman from Galilee being able to speak in multiple languages, right? God chooses the things that are foolish to make fools of the wisdom of the world. He took a Hebrew slave from the pit of a prison and brought him out and revealed some marvelous wisdom from, it has to be God. And that's what's kind of neat. And so he was pleased. Pharaoh's like, and so in 38 he says, and Pharaoh says to the servants, can we find a man like this in whom the Spirit is the Spirit of God? Not their God. Can we find, he's not saying, can we find somebody, an Egyptian, that's got a spirit of our God? No, their God. So it's like, who's the only guy in the room here? And it's like a rhetorical question. It's like saying, where can we find a God of, a man who has the spirit of Yahweh in him? Oh, this kid standing here, 30-year-old kid who just interpreted the dream and gave me this most brilliant wisdom. And I love the way now, look at Pharaoh, going from a polytheistic worshiping king to recognizing the power of this one God. And so, well, the obvious answer is, then Pharaoh said to Joseph, since God has shown you all of this, there's none so discerning and wise as you are. You shall be over my house, and all my people shall order themselves as you command. Only as regards with the throne will I be greater than you. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, see, I have set you over all the land of Egypt. Now I'm going to stop there. Now, this is an important phrase. Remember I told you about the divided Egypt, the lower Egypt, the different pharaohs? Back then, the reference, when they looked at it, that was not referred to as all Egypt. There was upper kingdom, lower kingdoms. This Pharaoh is identifying all of it. He's putting all of Egypt under Joseph. So that also helps us to confirm kind of a timeline. So he takes his signet ring from his hand and he puts it on Joseph's hand, and he clothed him in garments of fine linen, and he put a gold chain around his neck. Gone from a pit, slave clothes, and before the afternoon's over, he's dressed like a pharaoh. You think he saw that coming? 30 years, that he's been in prison in some form or another. The nicest clothes he had last time, a woman came at him and ripped his coat off. And now, all of a sudden, he's gone all the way up. He never expected this. He didn't say, I'm your man. He just advised the Pharaoh, you need to get somebody who can carry this plan out. Pharaoh recognized, no, not just anybody can do this. I need somebody, the wisdom of your God, because your God has revealed this plan. Your God has put this plan together. Your God has let me know about this disaster. Why would I pick anybody outside of somebody from your God? And I think that's when Joseph went, oh, I guess no more prison food? So finally, it's like but I think those were some very important years for him to be humbled and to understand what it's like to be in a prison, to be a slave, and go through all that he did. Because we see that character doesn't leave him later. We see that same beautiful spirit about him. And he made him ride second in his chariot and called out before him, bow the knee. Thus he set him over the land of Egypt. Moreover, Pharaoh said to Joseph, I am Pharaoh, and without your consent, no one shall lift up a hand or a foot in all of Egypt. So, remember the last time he was probably going down the streets of Egypt? He was a slave. He was the one bowing the knee to everybody. And now, here he is riding with the Pharaoh. And everybody's bowing the knee to him. So now here's a third one. We're going to see some evidence as well of which Pharaoh, what type of Pharaoh. And the Pharaoh called Joseph's name Zaphanath-Panethi, and he gave him in marriage Ashnath, the daughter of Potiphar, priest of On. So Joseph went out over the land of Egypt. Right there, his wife. So we talked a little bit on that eunuch issue, whether Potiphar was a eunuch. There was kind of some thought about that, and that I won't even go over again. I mean, he could have been, but Joseph gets a wife. He doesn't get eunuch. I don't even know if that's the right word. He didn't get turned into a eunuch to serve. He gets a wife, and he's going to end up with a family. And who is he married to? The daughter of a priest. That is an Egyptian god. This Pharaoh is Egyptian. He's not a Canaanite or an Asiatic type of Pharaoh. They didn't worship the god of On. So he becomes ruler over all. Joseph was 30 years old. So when did he go over there? 17. That's when his brothers threw him in the well. That's how we know. It's not over yet. So he entered the service of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and Joseph went out for the presence of the Pharaoh. And he went through all the land of Egypt. Why didn't he go home? Why did he not take a little short trip to go see Dad? Pharaoh wouldn't have had a problem. I mean, the only person that could have stopped him would have been Pharaoh himself. Why didn't he go home? It wouldn't have taken that long. Oh, I think he knew where Canaan was. They were. Oh, he could have found him. He had command of generals. He had command of Pharaoh's army. He could have sent scouts out. He could have located them. They come back, say, we know exactly where those Hebrews are at. There's something going on. And we're going to see this when we come to the reconciliation part. I told you he's been progressing and becoming Egyptian. He's an Egyptian with the Hebrew God. But he's given up. What memories does he have of his family? 11 brothers who hate him and tried to kill him. There's only one there that he loves, and that's Benjamin. He could have attacked them if he wanted to. He could have taken an army and marched back out there and said, you know what? Remember that dream I had, brothers? When I said you were going to bow down? Dad, bow down. And he's got 1,000 Egyptian soldiers standing around him. He could have got vengeance. He could have gone home and reconciled. But he doesn't go home. There's a change coming. So we'll discuss that more as we go next week and look at it. So some of the lessons, always remember, God has a plan. You don't understand all of the full length of it, how long it's going to take. Look how many times people have been predicting the end of the world, and it just hasn't ended yet. It keeps going on. Oh, yeah, now it's over. Oh, yeah, the fires in Hawaii. Oh, that's an apocalyptic sign now. Economy's fixing to crash. The end times are coming. 1948, people went out to Alamogordo on a mountain and sold all their goods and sat up there and waited for Jesus to return. Didn't show up. We don't know. But we know about the moment that we're living and breathing right now. And our faithfulness and how we love others and serve each other and God is a big part. Let God take care of the big plan. And that's what happened to Joseph. Everything that happened to Joseph was preparing him to do exactly what God wanted. It's probably not the career path that Joseph would have wanted to pick. If he would have said, I'm going to be second to Pharaoh. I need to go to this school. I need to get this vocation. I need to do this and this. No, not getting accused of rape, thrown into prison, enduring all that stuff. But God, again, used the wisdom of God to show the foolishness of man's wisdom. So God has a plan. The other thing is, like Paul said in Romans 8:28, he says, and we know that for those who love God, all things work together for the good. It's really hard to see sometimes. Sometimes we're going through it and it's like, okay, you got to memorize this part of the verse. Okay, Romans 8:28, all things work good for those who love the Lord, And all that was happening to him. And God is always with you. God was always with Joseph. He never revealed himself in a miraculous way ever to Joseph. But Joseph was able to remain faithful. And I've already kind of covered this one, but, it's in God's time. It's not in ours. We want our problems to be solved. We want to get out of prison. We might have to wait another 2 years the way Joseph went through. But God will take care of us overall. All right, well, that is the end of the discussion for tonight. Give just a few moments if you want to online. I forgot to put the mic, so we'll just have to repeat if you have questions or comments.
Because
You know, the way God works, it's hard to necessarily, I think, clearly, distinctly determine that. It's obvious these two individuals he comes into contact with are from directly Pharaoh's house. They have contact and can talk directly to the Pharaoh. So there's a gateway being built. Now, does Joseph see that as an opportunity to get in and serve there versus serving in the prison? Is that kind of what or instinctively was he doing this? And I think that it sounds because, you know, the way he tells the cupbearer his story, he tells him, please, let the Pharaoh know I'm a Hebrew and that I've been captured, sold into slavery, and I've been wronged. So if Pharaoh heard that and he had sympathy for him, what would he do? Employ him or set him free? Set him free. So I think Joseph's instinct was to get free, to get out of this prison. I'm not going to say I got the answer, but I'll tell you what, the fact that once he became in power, that he did not go home, is a loud message. There's something deep going on. He wanted to get out. He wanted to get free. He told the cupbearer, please tell the Pharaoh I've been wrongly imprisoned over here. I'm a Hebrew. They sold me. And if the Pharaoh would have said, you're right, okay, set the boy free, let him go, what would he have done? 2 years ago, before this, if he had been set free, there's somebody I was reading today, matter of fact, that's kind of interesting, that said, what if the cupbearer would have told him and Pharaoh let him go? And then Pharaoh has the dreams 2 years later. Where's Joseph? The cupbearer is going to go, hey, you know, I was in prison and that guy, remember I told you about him and you let him go free? He interpreted those dreams. Well, where is he? I don't know. Is he in Canaan? I don't know. But the fact that he was still in prison, they knew exactly where he was at. Where's he at? Oh, he's still down there in the pit. So I can't read into that. As far as like what was instinctive to him, I think was to get free. You couldn't get enough freedom to run a prison and have to live in it and still be satisfied with life. You'd want to get out of there. Yeah, that's a great idea. I'm glad you brought that up because I'd forgot about that idea about if they'd have set him free, where would he have been when the dreams came? So, all right, well, that's it for class. I hope you'll be able to join us Sunday morning. We're going to be looking at Paul and running across Timothy in Acts chapter 16. And then the lesson Sunday morning is going to be about, do you got thorns? Thorns, pain. And Sunday afternoon, we're continuing to look at Joseph. Hope you can join us. That's going to be 9:45 for Bible study, 10:45 for worship, and then back here, 4 o'clock Sunday afternoon, here 6 p.m. next week. So God bless. We'll see you.